Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jay, for coming on and talking about my Barrel Classic ride. We'll obviously go into serious depth with it. Probably mention the elephant in the room that's probably doing the rounds at this point. So exciting move ahead for yourself. Because do you want to maybe start with what are the goals, what you're kind of looking forward to next year, how this sort of plays out?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the big shift will be from a stage hunting type role with Alperson to more of a leadership role in going for actual GC results, and actually developing my time trial and all that sort of stuff with a wind tunnel setup and that sort of thing. I went from being able to do that all myself in Australia to not having the access in Europe, bit of a shoestring budget, to now being able to afford to go get all that stuff done. So yeah, exciting stuff.
To hear you say you're going to have GC leadership opportunities is kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
I know I've obviously chatted a lot to you this year, but I know one of the things you keep coming back to is this opportunity. Like essentially, like that it's not just people think that like everyone just goes to Europe and gets on a team and everyone's kind of just afforded the same opportunity, the same experience. But that's not the reality really of a pro team, is it? Like there's tiers to this, and the higher up the tiers you go, potentially the more opportunity you get. And I was hoping you might talk about just from even like an athletic perspective, like what does that look like for you as an athlete in terms of the opportunities that you can maybe get better at that you can now do?
For me, it comes down to like diet, or even diet wise. Like this year, I've essentially been able to maximize my diet outside of racing. But then when it comes to in racing, there are variables that I just can't control. And, some guys see weight gain, some guys see weight loss. And I was very much the weight gain person of, I know that for a given wattage throughout the day, depending on how hard I've worked, I need X amount of calories with X amount of carbs, protein, and I know what that looks like after I've put it on the scale and I've measured it all out. When I go to a race, obviously I still know all of that, but when there is no scale available for me to measure every individual item, whether they've stitched me up and I'm in Italy and they've put olive oil in the pasta. So it's plain pasta saturated with olive oil. A risotto that's been cooked with 500 grams of butter at the end, stuff like this, and you end up, gaining weight, or vice versa, going, I know there's a lot of calories in this, I'm going to skimp out on food and then under fueling for the next day. So you've got, that's pretty tricky for me, especially for someone whose weight is very important to my performance. Like, I'm not one of those, being on the higher end of 60 kilos, a kilo matters because that changes my watts per kilo by a lot, and all of a sudden I'm outside the competitive range. So yeah, that'll be for starters, a massive improvement, which, we have a full-time nutritionist with our new setup, to the point where I get emailed a sheet. Basically, it's a 10-page document, color-coded labels, and it's altered daily.
Yeah, wow.
Based on what I've done during the race or during the week, if I've had a change in my my program with my training. So, this stuff is a lot more optimized in more expensive teams.
And what kind of monitoring are they able to do? Like, is it what kind of feedback is I suppose, your body giving them? Are they obviously they're looking at your training and that kind of stuff, but in terms of that next level of insight into Jay Vine's like physiology, have you had any insight into that yet?
In terms of that, they will do metabolic testing it'll probably end up being in February, because that's the next time I'll be able to go to Europe.
Yep.
But yeah, so they'll do baseline testing of metabolic rates throughout the season even. So obviously my metabolic rate at the start of the season after Down Under is going to be completely different to after a Grand Tour.
Yeah, of course.
So they'll actually get a reading on that. So right now I'm just going off the average Joe MyFitnessPal 1900 calories a day. You know, I could be way more or way less. I think I've got a really slow metabolism, so I'm thinking way less, just based on my own personal perception, my opinion. But you know, to balance it out to within 50 or 100 calories is quite important. You know, so yeah, that thing is, once again, I didn't even consider that as an option at the start of this year. So
and all that sorry. But all that stress, do you know what I mean? Like the fact that you are thinking about this, you're on your MyFitnessPal like the rest of us Joe schmucks, like stressing about this. For us, like we might stress about it and then be like, oh, who cares? Like at the end of the day. Whereas like you're stressing about it and it's essentially your job and it matters. Like the amount of, I reckon, I was talking about this to Dan the other day, the amount of mental energy people can waste on all this kind of stuff when all they actually need is direction. Like if someone's willing to, if you've got a nutritionist giving you direction, the amount of stress release that's going to be on you is massive. Like I don't think I've had a conversation with you in the last 12 months where this topic hasn't come up. So clearly you have to think about it all the time.
Yes, especially in my situation where I pushed new levels with my weight this year. I've only been riding UCI events since 2019, so I don't know where my body can go, and we don't really have I did a DEXA scan just before the Volta this year, and it supposedly was at 9%, which would mean that I still had 6 kilos of fat to lose. Like, I was 67 kilos. Does it really think that I've got another, even half of that, get me down to 5%? Does it really think I could get down to 64 kilos? I doubt it. But, so even in terms of, was that DEXA scan true and accurate? This is the same DEXA scan that thought I was 20% during my off period. So, and that's... okay, sure. Yeah, right. So, yeah, I mean, for me, like, power to weight is everything. Like, I got asked by a journalist, how do you climb so well? Like, what's the theory behind that? It's like, power to weight. It's as simple as it is,
I put bulk
follow the wheel
out,
in front of you.
And I put bulk watts out, and I don't weigh that much. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, and I don't meet much, that's basically it. And yeah, also, there's always changing science around fasted riding, non-fasted riding, when to reduce calories, when to increase calories. So my new setup is going to be on top of the data all the time, whereas there is still the old school thought of, don't eat dessert, it's got a lot of calories. But you can eat a peanut butter sandwich.
Yep.
Peanut butter has just the same amount of calories as chocolate bar. Sorry.
Most overrated healthy food in the world, avocado. Sorry, there you go. I just said it out loud. People, I love it. I love an avocado, but eating a whole avocado, a full entire avocado, is... Anyway, let's not go down.
Is
that.
absurd.
Is not particularly good. I just like in a cafe, you'll see like the healthy breakfast, and it's like literally 2 halves of a full avocado. You're like, okay.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. On multigrain bread and probably some feta.
Yeah.
Like the amount of fat that is in that meal is just ridiculous.
Oh no, we're just triggering the high fat crowd. Come on. Let's leave them.
My favorite thing was in Italy. So the Italians are funny. They have dessert for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll have a tiny little slither. So like a slither maybe that big, right? Of costata,
Yep.
which is essentially a marmalade tart.
Yep.
So they'll have a slither of that, maybe a piece of pineapple,
Espresso.
and an espresso. That's it. They won't eat then from 8 o'clock through to 1:30 then.
Yep.
And it's like, that's how they stay skinny.
Yep.
Whereas we come along and we go, dessert for breakfast? Cool, I'll have 6 slices of this. I'll have some Nutella on top, 4 cappuccinos, and whoop, there goes 2,000 calories in breakfast.
My panna cotta. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other kind of thing you sort of touched on a little bit, just to potentially leave nutrition aside for a moment, is the time trial thing.
Yes.
And do you want to maybe kind of have a quick chat about that? Just because obviously you've got some goals in that area, right?
Absolutely. Like people might not know, but I really enjoyed time trialing in Australia. I was state time trial champion ACT a bunch of times and set the record on the New South Wales TT course on a 2012 bike that never been near a wind tunnel. But I was able to, optimize pedals, skin suit, nice helmet, actually get into a reasonable aero position on the bike. But that just hasn't been afforded to me since going to Europe. So, until the Volta, I was riding the wrong size bike. So, being able to put time in a tunnel in the right position is going to improve massively. I don't think I've done a full gas time trial this year because of
the
fact that I'm just gonna I am 10% slower than everyone else at the same wattage.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
Yeah.
So, and especially that TT that Remco won in the Volta, obviously at a higher speed, wattage is almost cubed, I think. So you've got to do impossible watts to be able to keep up.
Yep.
So being able to work on that, and people saying, "Oh, you should just practice anyway. Practice the time trials.
Practice being in the wrong position.
Hurting myself. Trust me, I do the practice on everything else. I've reconned every time trial that they've done in Europe. So gone the morning of, done the recon, then gone back to the hotel, then gone out with the bus later, done all right, this is when I would have the bicarb, this is when I would have the caffeine, practice those protocols. But there is no point going full gas in them because you're just wasting energy for the next day,
let's maybe have a quick chat about 2022. Did you achieve what you wanted this year? Was it everything you expected? How do you look back at the year?
I really wanted to, win some more bike races at the start of the year, but I also think that maybe I don't win the stage 6 in Volta the way I did had I not been beaten earlier in the year. For example, in Bessage, when I came second on the hilltop, I definitely had another attack in me, and instead I let it come down to a sprint and ultimately got boxed in and missed out. Then fast forward a couple of months later at Turkey, I was the strongest on the day, but was only attacking for 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Yeah. And people can follow those attacks for 20 or 30 seconds. It's, if you're feeling good, you need to go full for longer. And then in Norway, I learnt to be in the right position with your direct competition, so that you're able to follow the attacks more readily and save energy, and also don't open yourself up to being counterattacked by your strongest competitor. So all those little learns throughout the year of second again, ultimately I think led to such a good performance at the Volta. Obviously coupled with the training, the altitude, all that sort of stuff, and yeah, the maturity of look. I sort of knew the numbers were really good, and above that is virtually impossible. So once I had the gap and there was no more drafting available on the final part of the climb, as long as I was able to hold it to the finish, you can't go any faster on climbs like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was yeah.
So the other couple of races that I thought were really interesting was obviously you dipped your toe a little bit in the monument world.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe just have a quick chat about like the differences that you've encountered there? Because from what I heard from you, it's a different ball game.
Yes. So yeah, the difference between racing at FTP after 4,500 calories or even 5,000 calories is completely different to 6,000.
Yep.
And monuments nowadays are that. I mean, I was speaking to Christian, one of my teammates, Christian Spragley, and 10 years ago, races like Lombardia, they didn't ride full on every climb, or they didn't even ride, medio on every climb. It was, on some of the climbs, it was, you wish you had a 34 because you were going too slow up them. You'd stop to go bathroom for 2 or 3 times throughout the day without having to worry about, all right, it's a bit of a chase now for the next 10 minutes to get back into the group. And that's the thing with racing, it's changed to, can you absorb enough food? Can you stay easy long enough? And is your body suited to that type of racing compared to the back-to-back 4,000, 4,500 calorie days that Grand Tour racing is? And that's a very different thing, especially if you're not at the top of your game.
Yeah.
Like myself, after my crash in Volta, lots of lessons learned about myself, about how long I need to take off after a crash, whether altitude after a Grand Tour is a good idea to get ready for the next event, all this sort of thing. And that's another thing where I didn't know about myself that I've had to learn at the age of 26, whereas other guys may have learned it a lot earlier. I'm following a very similar path to the traditional path of the first 3 or 4 years of your career, you're getting bottles. Then you might dip your toe into winning a couple of races, one days or stages. Then during your 28 to 32, we're going to work on GC ambitions. And then in your latter part of your career, you go into a helper. The progression of riders is completely different now. It's now to the point where a 20-year-old, unless they win a race in their first year, they might not get a renewal.
Well, mate, like we know that, like, if you didn't win a race in that first year, like you're probably back in Australia. Like that's we sit here and we say, oh, the racing's changed. Well, the racing's changed because like your circumstance, like you have to produce. You don't get 3 years to go get bottles,
Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy, like, to look at the amount of money that's in cycling compared to other sports, and the science that is now involved in this sport to optimize everything compared to your AFL or your rugby league or union. Like, the Lions football team has built a multi-million-dollar training ground in Springfield in Brisbane here, just for training. Like, they've got that cash, just spare cash, just lying around, and we're, here in Alperson trying to get an extra bus so that we don't have to use a camper van at the smaller races, So,
And yet, I would argue that the actual athlete themselves is actually far more, the cyclist that is actually a far more highly tuned athlete than said contact sport player, just because of the rigors of and now this essentially 9-10 month season that you're doing, it's pushing it even further and further.
I think, as we've seen, guys are calling their season early though.
Yeah,
I
true.
think this full gas from January 27 or something is till, some people at Langkawi until the 15th of October. That's ridiculous, Like, yes, people are known for going and doing a lot of race days, but sometimes those race days are a lot more condensed.
Yep.
So, you might do you might do 80, 85 race days, but it's, you might come off, Romandy and go straight into Swiss or something like that. There's 16 race days in those two events, whereas, some guys are only doing 60 days, but it's throughout the whole year and they're not having a chance to take a breath because we're doing one day here, then you're flying to the other side of the world to do a couple of days there,
How many did you do this year?
I think I got to like 60 or 62.
Yeah, okay.
It's basically doubled my race days from last year. But yeah, I mean, there was pullouts of Swiss and Paris-Nice due to sickness as well. So I lost like 10 days in those two events alone.
What do you just going back to that? Like, what do you think that was? Because that was bizarre. That whole couple of months in the world tour, wasn't it? Like, do you subscribe to the whole? Oh, it's because everyone was in a bubble, and now all of a sudden we're out and about. What was like the peloton saying? Was there any chat about it?
I don't believe it was because of the bubble, because frankly, we haven't really, Europeans have been walking around for over 12 months before Paris-Nice happened in public. So yes, in races we were in bubbles, but outside of races,
You're in normal.
you go to a grocery store and it's just normal life. So you're getting exposed to things. But yeah, after Paris-Nice, and it was so quick as well. I did the time trial in the morning. On the Wednesday, or whatever it was. Had dinner at like 7:30, 8 o'clock p.m. Hopped into bed. By 10:30, I was cooked. Like, full sweats, but couldn't get cool, and then fully freezing. I think I was running a temperature of like 38.5, nearly 39, with over a gram of paracetamol in my system to try and lower my core temp. And the doctor just looked at me like, "No, you're out of here. You're going home." And my roommate was no problem.
Yeah, wow.
So it was crazy how fast it came, and my wife had lingering effects of it. Brie had lingering effects of this thing for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And she was on the same antibiotics as me to try and kill this thing, and it wouldn't. So I don't know. I think there's some things that just knock you.
Yeah.
But we did, obviously, to get on a plane after this, you had to do some COVID tests. So it wasn't COVID apparently. So I don't know. Yeah, and it was sort of indiscriminate who it hit as well, which was crazy.
So that actually brings up an interesting point, and that's what I did want to chat to you about was a little bit about these setbacks, because yes, you kicked a lot of goals this year, but
Yep.
you know, you had some crashes, you had a lot of sickness, you had race results that were a bit shit, you didn't like them, blah blah blah, as most athletes do. But I'm interested in like how you deal with this, because like in a team sport or something, like, you know, you probably got your teammates around you and you go to training the next day and they pat you on the back and say, you know, you'll be right, get over it, mate. And then your coach is probably coming around and, you know, giving you a pat on the back and all the rest of it. But you basically have no one except Bree. And so how do you deal with that? Because, you know, it's your livelihoods.
I guess I'm very analytical when it comes to everything, really. Coming from, you know, trying to turn pro at an elder age and trying to optimize everything back in Australia, I've come down to every opportunity I want to make the most of it. So analyzing things like, okay, what happened? Was it good? Was it bad? How can I improve? Or what did I do wrong? And then formulating a plan so that either I want to repeat that again, or how can I minimize what went wrong, or was it out of my control? Like, was there nothing else I could do to fix that problem? Okay, let's put that aside then, and let's not dwell on it. Obviously, take some time to get over it. And like, you know, accept the fact that it's sad, because, you know, sadness is a very valid emotion. If you weren't sad about, you know, making a mistake or losing an opportunity, then would you really care? But at the end of the day, fix the things that you can fix and basically get over the things that you can't, which is where Bree's been really crucial in the getting over things that you can't control. You know, and she's been crucial to how I've, you know, gone about this sort of thing. You know, we don't go to the level of yellow notepad, write it all down, word bubble web thing that you do at school. Like, what's it called? It's a
like a post-it note type.
Yeah, that sort of thing where you draw lines out from the center and
like brainstorming,
make a brainstormy thing. No, we don't go to that level. I was always sucky at those, but you know, we just work through things logically to try and make the best out of things. You know, whereas that be okay, you were really hot at this race during your sleeping. You know, the windows didn't open. There was mosquitoes outside. If they did open, how do we minimize that? We're going to pack a small portable fan. That'll fix that problem. Oh, the fan's too loud and annoys your roommate. We'll get you a quiet portable fan so that the roommate can't complain. You know, oh, there's mosquitoes outside and the hotel refuses to put the aircon on because electricity is really expensive. We're going to get you a mosquito net. So yes, sleeping in Europe in a mosquito net in a hotel so that you can have the window open and not get eaten alive. You know, you got a puncher in this race on the cobbles. Okay, let's lower the pressure this time and let's make sure we check every race. Are the pressures correct? No, they're too high. Can you please lower the pressures? You know, checking the spare bike. I hopped on the spare bike at this race. It didn't feel right. Turns out the saddle was a centimeter different. Check the spare bike at the start of every race. You know, stuff that, you know, that you wouldn't think was an issue. Check it. You know, if people like Moscon had done that on that Paris-Roubaix a couple of years ago,
probably wins.
Might have won. You know. So, and that's in one of the best teams in the world. So, you know, these little things that they take time, but you don't want to make the same mistake twice.
Can I ask, is that the rule or the exception? Are you strange by doing all that, or Is that what most guys are doing? Because to me, that doesn't seem that like strange. It's like, well, this is your job. You would be looking for these solutions, or are most guys just sort of trucking along and?
I don't know. Like I obviously came from a mountain bike background where I bought my first mountain bike on a credit card and had to optimize everything, had to organize my own accommodation, my own food, my own semi-sponsors, which was basically, oh, here's a 10% discount, shout us out every once in a while. You know the story with sponsorship in the world of cycling nowadays. But that sort of optimization of doing that myself, I've sort of had to carry that through, whereas I believe that a lot of guys, they're getting picked up at the age of 15, going into a team, possibly with a paycheck at 16 or 17, and they haven't had to do anything themselves. So, they might not know what bar they need to put in their tires.
Yep.
They might not know what gearing they need for a 16% gradient.
Yeah.
So they don't know what to ask for.
Yeah.
Because it's all been done themselves.
It's funny because like what you're explaining there, what you're describing there, like solutions, reminds me so much of like all the chats that we would have in 2019, especially in 2020, when, you were essentially kind of bouncing ideas off me about like, how can I get fucking noticed? I'm in this bloody cage in the ACT in Australia, and we're like, how can we get noticed? And you were doing what? You did like the Everest thing. You did the friggin' time trial, tried to break the time trial Strava segment, like, doing all these things. But that's what it was, right? It was you trying to find solutions to this problem, and it's interesting, like essentially you're just kind of carrying that through, but to like winning Vuelta stages, which is, on par with a segment of time trialing around the ACT. But
of course, I mean, equal Black Mountain KOM, Vuelta, Pico Llano, like they're pretty
equal,
pretty close.
Pretty equal.
Like I think. Yeah, crucially, like having that support structure with my wife and I, like she watches all my races. So, we often debrief after the race. Still do that about, where I went wrong or what she thought she saw and all this sort of stuff. So, I mean, best example, elephant in the room, I lost the polka dots. Funnily enough, as if God was trying to play a funny joke on me, a couple of days before, I said to Bree jokingly, "Oh, you like to make positives out of negatives all the time. The positive of me losing the jersey somehow would be the ability to work out how I deal with that in the future. If there's a more important jersey that I lose later down the track." And a couple of days later, I've learnt that lesson now.
It's a lesson you didn't
stuff
need
like
to
that.
Learn. You didn't need to learn that one. Though I will say, blue dots doesn't look good on you. Doesn't look good on you. Yeah. So just to let you know. Okay, so the only other kind of question I had for you, which sort of interests me a bit, was the altitude camp stuff. So can you I'd be really interested in what that looks like. What does an altitude camp look like for you as an elite cyclist? So you go in, and I'm talking about one of the team ones, not the Bree J. Yeah, that's another chat for another day. But that's what the guys used to do. They had to fund their own
studio. Yeah, studio apartment at the top of the mountain where the bike is in the same room as the kitchen and the toilet and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that.
Well, I guess.
So yeah, what do the team ones look like when you go in, like training wise, nutrition wise? Like, is it like take us there, because that fascinates me.
Well, the whole idea behind altitude camps is the science isn't 100%, right? Now, I find that it works well for me, but some studies have gone, oh, well, it's the fact that you're in a enclosed environment, training quality with a group goal in mind, and that's what gets you the best gains. It's got nothing to do with the altitude. And, I happen to disagree with that purely based on the fact that I have that environment at home already with Bree. Like, Bree's job is to be the Swanee at home for me. And if I'm cooked, I don't do anything at home, the same as you would at a training team camp. So putting that all aside, it basically, for me, it involved, custom workouts for myself where we'd all leave the altitude together, group ride, group banter, don't crash on the descent down from altitude, and do your training, do some endurance after. Team bonding, it's crucial. We're all paid to ride for each other, but if you've got mateship with the guy next to you who's supposed to put you in position at the base of the climb or supposed to do that last turn in the lead out, they're going to go that extra 4 or 5%, go that extra 20 meters in the lead out, which might be the difference between winning or losing.
You know how proud it makes me to hear you say that? But anyway, go on.
Like, that is also another big thing that you don't get when you do your own thing at altitude. And then, well, for example, we had our own cook for our camps. So, making sure you're getting in the right nutrition, and then adjusting accordingly. Like, everyone's individual. So I'd often have a little bit more protein and carbohydrates just so that I would not lose drastic amounts of weight, because that was another thing. If you were slightly too heavy, the altitude camp was a good opportunity just to cut a little bit extra because you are increasing your metabolism when you go up.
So this is the bit that interests me. So you're, I remember you saying this before, and that's that because you're at altitude, that speeds up your metabolism, that speeds up your calorie burning potential. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
But then
yes,
aren't you
exactly.
still having to, essentially, if you're training hard, aren't you still then having to refuel that, or are you then still running a deficit?
I'm still running a deficit, but you're still, don't get me wrong, you're still fueling your rides as per normal, basically, and still getting the right amount of recovery in, but you're able to, when you're doing nothing, so, you're only training for 4 or 5 hours a day. Outside of that, when you're in essentially ketosis, it's maybe not be called ketosis, maybe it's just like baseline, just lying, watching Netflix, you then do switch into fat burning, where you're not going to be using the glycogen that's supposed to be being diverted to your legs. And we throw in little extras like having ketones to switch off the carbohydrate burning and all that sort of stuff as well. So, like, little things like that. Trying to optimize the team environment and make it comfortable as well. Like, there's nothing worse than trying to do an altitude camp in a hotel, because then you're sort of restricted by their rules of these are their eating times, and these are the rooms that you have to stay in. Whereas if you hire a house together, everyone's mingling, everyone's chatting, all that sort of stuff. That team bonding is pretty crucial.
Yeah. I mean, you know how I feel about that. That was, and I, not to make back about a little bit about us, but that was one of the real struggles in the last year or two with the team here, was that it was almost impossible to get Airbnbs now because of the COVID restrictions and limited numbers of people in houses. which ultimately put us into hotels and put us into motels. And, you know, that's 2 people in a room. And it's like, well, that's shit. That's not Nero. That's not everyone mucking in and putting a load of washing on and, you know, doing the rest of it and getting Jay to cook his dinner that night for everyone. So, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you just mentioned, I was just quickly interested in some of the little supplement stuff. So obviously, had a little bit of experience with the ketones. So using that as a bit of a recovery thing during the training camps. Is that how that's working?
Yes. So I have experienced it with recovery and also during the bike. And for me personally, it does not work on the bike at all. For example, I tried it at Liège and essentially stayed in ketosis for the whole race, to the point where we got to Roche-Fontaine, I think it was. No, it might have been La Redoute. And I had my threshold, and that was it. So instantly got shelled. I got shelled before the climb because we sped up so fast. And then annoyed everyone in Gruppetto by continuing to ride too hard for a person that had been dropped, but not hard enough to stay in the actual bike race. So, so it just doesn't work for me during bike races. But also, as a sample size of me, I don't know if it actually did anything for recovery, you know? Like, I've never done for example, a Grand Tour without it.
Yep.
So I don't know if it would be better or worse. And obviously there's no control of, here's what Jay would have done after that day without it. So I don't know. Seems to be okay. They taste like garbage. I'll tell you that for much. They are. That's an Australian slang tang for you right there. But yeah, they're not the best things to be drinking.
How did your bicarb experience go? Any issues or all under control downstairs?
Bicarb? No, bicarb was fine.
Good.
Not an issue with the bicarb. Which some people, like obviously as you're alluding to, quite funnily struggle with. Also days after. So that's one thing that teams have to test. The weight gain post bicarb in the following days, because essentially it's salt. It's just salt to try and buffer the lactic acid, and the salts basically hold water after that. So you don't want to be taking a bunch of bicarb, gaining 2 or 3 kilos, going into a mountain day. That wouldn't be optimal. So that's also something that you have to test outside of competition. But once again, I've not really had a problem with bicarb. So yeah. Yeah.
I don't think there's any other ones. No, that was about it.
Caffeine? Is that something?
Yeah. So are you training with caffeine?
Definitely on the harder sessions. So there was a good session that I did this year in prep for Volta, which was essentially threshold climbs at the start of the ride. So within the first hour, 30 minutes or 40 minutes at threshold, followed by 2 or 3 hours of just endurance, followed by 40 minutes in the final hour of the ride, threshold. So doing threshold after 3,500 calories burn, and using caffeine to make sure you hit the goals, because in a race I'm always using caffeine in the final of a ride anyway. Doing it during training is a good way to make sure I'm getting the quality of those efforts. And personally, I don't personally get this whole, I've had caffeine, now I'm flying, but I'm able to do the work, I think, past what I would have been able to do after it. And I certainly don't get a negative feeling from it, but I just don't get this, like even when I drink coffee, I don't get this click. I feel great now. I feel awake. I think it's more of a slow sort of reaction that I have to it. So
The only other thing I was sort of specifically going to maybe ask, and I know you were kind of a little bit keen to talk about, was just the time off stuff. Obviously, what you're kind of experiencing now as a pro, and how you approach this time off, and then how little, if any, value that has for an amateur cyclist.
yes, the off period for an amateur is hell, because you're essentially, your job is to go to work and earn money so that then you can enjoy and ride your bike. And unless you're doing, nearly 20 hours a week or high teens training a week for a long extended period of time, you really don't need an off period. Definitely not more than 2 weeks. And most people get an off period at some point during their year anyway, whether it be a work trip or a family holiday,
Weather.
and you don't touch weather, unless you're on the online platforms. You're not riding the bike for enough time throughout the year that you can just go, all right, I'm rebuilt, and now the legs are firing, the mind's back to it. It's time to get going again. But for me, as a professional, living and breathing cycling. Like, I think the first drink that I had this year was the 17th or something of October, because I just don't drink throughout the year. I don't like the taste of most alcohols, but I'm a sucker for Kilkenny and maybe an espresso martini. So those are my sort of go-to things to have on my off period. And then also the diet, like mentally calculating every damn calorie. Just to be able to splurge mentally on the foods that you like cheese, like chocolate, fats. I don't want to see a pasta, a piece of spaghetti, or a piece of rice, or potato is a big one for me. I eat a lot of potatoes, so the sugary carbs is definitely something that creeps into your diet. And outside of the mental thing, the physical, all right, the body just gets to relax and not have this up and down of glycogen usage every day. It feels like you finally just get to settle into a rhythm of, okay, we can chill out, which is important, especially because our race season is so long.
Does it feel sort of almost like cleansing?
But I feel like it is, because, for example, when I do go on my binge, for example, I'm now a day or two away from riding again, and my body has self-regulated. Like, I've put on maybe 4 or 5 kilos, and now the calorie intake, my body has gone, you're hungry now, Jay.
Yeah.
Eat a little bit, now you're not hungry. Whereas in the start, it was just shoveling food in at the same rate that you were previously when you were riding, and obviously the weight balloons up. But after a certain amount, you just stop. The body does self-regulate, and I've only been professional for 2 years, but I've never been like, I am dreading hopping on the bike again. I've always been, okay, I'm looking forward to the following season on the new opportunities and what I can do and all that sort of stuff. But I have always gone, I want to have a break and relax for just a little bit before getting stuck into the next lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, coming back to the amateur thing, I think you're dead right. Like, there's so many other variables in your life, like, that could create stress around your life, that are going to get in the way of your leisure, even doesn't matter how serious your leisure pastime is, that the structuring particular time off is not necessarily relevant. Certainly not in the kind of climate that we live in. Like, just the fact that you are kind of well able to. I mean, obviously, if you lived in Andorra, then yeah, probably not that easy to bash out the Ks during January. But that issue doesn't necessarily exist so much.
My dad understood it, but my mum didn't. Now, what I mean is, with the off-season, I've come back to Australia, and basically I've spent the last week doing yard work, mowing the lawn, digging up weeds. I've got a old Mini Cooper that I'm trying to make work. So like stuff that's not cycling related, and also that you might think of as a chore that you just miss out on when you're overseas. And my dad used to say, when he did his flying and the base would shut down over the Christmas break, he wouldn't want to touch anything to do with flying, and he would make, he would do stuff outside of that with his cars, and it's just something different, I remember when I was an amateur, I used to, all year was cycling, but I was also working a desk job and all that sort of stuff. And that became my escape. Cycling became my escape from that. Whereas now with the job of cycling, you do just want to put all that aside and not talk bikes.
Yep.
But, I've now done that for nearly 3 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to January, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's potentially a chat for a different day, actually, about sort of how your mindset changes from like it being an escapism to, I know it's kind of pretty cliche to say, oh, it's my job, but how that sort of mindset shifts and how you kind of approach that. Just while you were talking there, I was just thinking, like, how have you found like dealing with kind of legacy media, like, proper media outlets and things like that? Because, you're a pretty straight shooting guy, right? And I know both of us have potentially been a little bit frustrated with the kind of pigeonholing that they love to do with you. It's like, yep, he's the Zwift guy, or whatever. But have you sort of figured out a strategy with it? Like, are you just gonna keep straight shooting? Like, what are you thinking?
I'm just gonna keep straight shooting, in my opinion. Like I said, I got criticised because I'm a bit robotic, apparently, for saying, this is what happened during the race. Because the questions, are like, how'd today go? What are you supposed to answer with that? Who, what, when, where, how, and why? Okay, the day went well or bad. Can I improve or can I not improve? Am I happy with it or am I not happy with it? Thank you to the team. What else do they want me to say? Oh, I was filled with passion, or so, I don't know. But yeah, that's basically how I'm going to keep rolling with it, because I'm not interested in adding fluff. Like, that's not my personality, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I kind of felt like you actually offered more insight. Like, when the guy asked you, like, what was the best thing about winning the stage, and you said, like, the bonus, and he was like, oh, what? You can't say that. You can't say that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's what he thinks.
Well, what else?
Like,
what else was I supposed to say?
Yeah, I don't know. This is for me to say and not for you to say, but I just honestly believe that a lot of the people working in that are just, they don't actually understand bike racing. A lot of them, like, I really do think that there's a lack of. I mean, that's one of the reasons Patrick is so. I think he's carved a really good niche for himself, is because he's actually got some insight into bike racing, and that's potentially not in the mainstream media. But again, maybe that's just for me to say, not you. Right. Look, we've almost cracked an hour. That's a pretty good run, man.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the setup from here is hopefully we're going to see a good bit of each other. Next time we might do this, we will be in the same room. That's for sure.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, so do you want to maybe? I mean, you're here for nationals, so hopefully we're gonna to link up for a bit.
Yes, exactly. Gonna do some riding around Sydney, have another chat, go through some prep for what it takes to prep for nationals and tour down under after off season basically, and what that involves, and yeah, see you guys in Sydney, and you can help us around the Buninyong circuit that we have to do. What was it 18 times, 16 times, something like that?
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much, mate. Obviously, but I'll see heaps of you in the near future. There's loads of videos of me talking to Jay on the channel. I'll link them down below. Loads of videos of Jay doing Jay things on this channel, so I'll link those down below as well. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, ciao.